All right, you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right, let's go live.
Okay.
Uh, Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm Shane Snipes, and this is the eShip Show here at BMCC. We're excited to have today a very special guest who's going to bring a brand new way of thinking about an industry that has been around for ages and ages and ages. And there's a transformation happening in that industry. And Dasheeda Dawson is going to be talking to us about that industry of cannabis. Yes, you heard me right. Cannabis is our industry today. We're going to be talking about how it's transforming, how it's evolving. Canada this week literally just legalized pot across its entire nation. And there's all kinds of ways that that's going to have implications for business too, because, now people will take flights, they'll go up there and they'll enjoy the experience of what that is. There's all kinds of medicinal benefits to cannabis. And there's a real opportunity for it to transform lives in different ways as people get out and start to utilize this new industry and this new business. So Dasheeda Dawson, thank you so much for coming out to see us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and so to get things going and to sort of give a little bit more background about you, I want folks to understand that you have a lot of experience. We were just talking before in the pre-show a little bit about what are some of your background and the way you worked in digital and how you moved into different spaces and you've worked in different places. And I know you're like me. One of the things that I worked with for years and years, probably from about 1995 until 2013, was my own consulting firm. And it focused on HR and consulting and strategy. And I eventually moved into innovation and setting up innovation labs. So I'd love for you to talk about how you see that experience in that space evolving and creating a space for you now as an advocate for cannabis.
Well, I'm just excited to be here with you guys. So again, good morning. I'm Dasheeda, and I kind of renamed myself the Weed Head. And I am a self-proclaimed corporate to cannabis crossover, moving, like I jokingly say, from Target to THC. I am also a global advocate as well as a medical marijuana patient. And really, to get into the industry, I founded MJM Strategy in 2016. To be perfectly honest, it was one of the easiest ways to get into the industry was to have a consumer experience and then put my consumer marketing expert hat on and say, hey, there was an opportunity for me to leverage what I'd done at Target and Victoria's Secret here in the cannabis industry. And so a lot of times people feel like if you can't get direct route into an industry, you can always start with your own skill set and offer that as a consulting, particularly if you know you're filling a need. And my first time at retail, I was actually in the Arizona market. I could tell right away that I would be fulfilling a need, and that the industry would need to elevate its messaging, its marketing, its branding, potentially even rebrand in total in order for this to be a mainstream product and concept. And so strategy and management consulting is what MJM Strategy does. We're actually the first minority-owned business of this type in the industry. And basically, we try to take the business higher. We try to take the industry higher. We do everything from strategic.
Is that a pun? No, I'm just kidding.
Yes. No, of course, everything is a pun. No, I try to have a little bit of fun with it, but at the same time, it is a serious thing that we spend a lot of energy doing. Believe it or not, most of my clients now, I transition from brands and individuals to more municipalities and special interest groups. I am helping the cities to determine the best way to ready the market, educate the market, and roll out legalization in a way that will be both fruitful for the city and the constituents, as well as really restorative for a lot of the communities that were destroyed during the war on drugs. And so it is an easy parlay because I honestly feel like people think if you just make weed legal, everyone's going to run out to the dispensary in droves. And that's just not the case, particularly Black and Hispanics who have been disproportionately arrested due to marijuana possession. There's a big fear in our community about utilizing publicly, being associated with the smell. And so we've got to re-educate and prepare the market and let them know that things have changed, the law have changed. But we also have to re-educate law enforcement, dogs. There's a whole bunch of stuff in the infrastructure that is built around the prohibition of marijuana. And so I work really closely with politicians and legislators to ensure that we're doing it smart and we're doing it with innovation, using the digital space and ensuring that we're doing it using real science as the background, not bro science. A lot of marijuana is based on the bro science.
Right. Well, we'll dig into each one of those pieces because I really like what you were saying about it's important that municipalities start to address this because it is an approaching market, right? It's an emerging market, and in certain places, that market is going to continue to evolve and grow, and sometimes it can happen very quickly.
Absolutely.
Certain states making certain changes. So in terms of the business side, as far as like getting things organized for people who might want to move into the cannabis industry, or for people who are interested in moving to places that are friendlier and have an opportunity for them to get involved in that, what are some ways that you can give some advice into that?
Well, I say the first thing starts with education or re-education. If you feel like you are really knowledgeable about the plant because you've been using it yourself, one, don't be ashamed. We need more people to come out the cannabis closet. But know that probably you are basing a lot of your information on bro science, not real science. So I graduated from Princeton University with a degree in molecular biology. So I'm actually a scientist.
I know. I saw that and I was like, okay, I might geek out with you a little bit with science.
It's so good. I'm a geek. I love it. So we can definitely do that. But it also makes me really serious about the plant, right? Because at the end of the day, it's still botany. And at the molecular level, these are really important molecules to our body. And so when we start having conversations that are based on Cheech and Chong and Snoop Dogg, no offense to them, I feel we start to confuse the consumer about really what the benefits are. And so I say start with education. That's the number one thing. Join a network that's going to educate you. One of the first places I joined was Minorities for Medical Marijuana. Now, this is a national advocacy group. I'm now the chief strategy officer. It's this is how I am an advocate all the time because I'm part of this organization, but we have a network across the country. And if you want to get involved, you can easily go to mmunited.org. And again, you'll get really tapped into access to education events in your area for you to network and meet other people like myself in the industry. But more importantly, educate yourself around the truth around the plant because there's a lot of misconceptions. The second thing is evaluate your own skill to cross over into the industry, right? A lot of people, the first thing they'll say to me is, I want to open a dispensary. And I go back to, because I'm a business girl, I go back to benchmarking and I look at the gold rush, for example. And to be perfectly honest, during that time, the people who made the most money were not the people who were actually going out looking for gold. I use an example in one of my master classes about how the picks and the shovels were actually the best bets. And so the ancillary businesses that help support people who are out looking for gold actually wind up being most profitable. The best example is actually Levi Strauss, who started making jeans for the purveyors and speculators, and we know we still wear Levi's now. And so that was started during that time. I love that as a great case example. So I say when you look at the cannabis industry, definitely look with a critical eye about the white spaces around the industry that will help support build it. That's why I came in as a consultant, because I was like, oh, there's a hole in consumer marketing. There's a hole in product development in the mainstream sense. People still do it, but you'll sometimes find the packaging doesn't have your typical dosage or the ingredient list. I mean, a lot of times you're in, a dispensary, you're not sure exactly what you're getting, even in regulated markets. And now that the East Coast is coming online, I think that's going to change. And so you'll see more need for the mainstream way of marketing products, the mainstream way of developing products. So I saw that hole and I jumped in, but there's a lot. If you do security, if you're an electrician, the lighting for just the grow houses, if you're a design person, you can absolutely design grow houses and or dispensaries. So you can basically do what you are currently doing or what you want to do. If you're in college, you can do that in the cannabis industry. In fact, I encourage people to cross over, because in order for us to grow, in order for us to legitimize, we need more people to come in and bring their expertise.
Yeah.
So those are
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. And those points are really salient. They're like related to your abilities and or interest. Take that and apply it to those areas. I talk to my students and mentor other entrepreneurs all the time, and I say to them, look, my niche was sustainability. That's what I went into. There was a gold rush on sustainability, a gold rush on sustainability analytics. And I said, when it comes to understanding the impact of climate change on business, what does that look like? What do businesses need to know? And I developed just a few algorithms around a very niche business and was able to sell that for a lot of money.
That's awesome.
So those are the types of things that people can do. They can think about what are the big needs related to these areas, and or how does it apply to the businesses around cannabis and what cannabis is. Let's talk about your journey here just for a second. I want us to talk about when you're all your experience that you had in the corporate environment. It's nice to see big brands. I've worked a lot with Best Buy. I worked a lot with Microsoft, the big tech companies. I've worked a lot with a lot of those. And when I did that, what I really found fascinating and also exciting is I gained so much knowledge, and then I just took my own personal interest, and it made me step out into other places. Mm-hmm. So what was that step out journey for you, when you're in the corporate environment, and how did your mind kind of shift, or did it?
Well, I think I've always been entrepreneurial, and that's what made me a great leader in corporate America. I feel Target I did my MBA at Rutgers, and I left from there and eventually winded up at Target in Minnesota. And it really helped me hone my leadership skills. They had very big business protocol, big business processes. And when you're leading large cross-functional teams, you want to understand how processes work. So I absorbed all of that. At the same time, they were also having some business challenges around the plus size market, around the African American beauty market. And those were areas to me, because of the challenge part of it and that the businesses were not doing well, I actually took an interest to, because I felt like that meant there were solutions that were required, particularly around the natural hair market. And that's when I really started to feel more that pull from an entrepreneurial perspective. Around the time that I was reaching around my second year at Target, my older sister, who was an award-winning writer and producer, Imani Dawson, she left her corporate position to start a blog about her hair and about being a natural, curly-haired, big-haired woman. And at the time, it was just at the beginning of African American women doing this massive transition from perms and relaxers and straightening your hair to loving your hair as it naturally grows out of your head. By her choosing to follow her entrepreneurial path, I looked at it as an opportunity too. And of course, when she's brainstorming, I was supporting it. And eventually I became the CEO of her media company blog. And together we were able to grow it quite well. I did that while I was still an executive at Target. So I encourage everyone to, figure out what that side hustle is. And usually it should be something you're passionate about. One of our biggest clients was Shea Moisture, who recently got a major purchase done by Unilever. It is the largest African-American hair care brand now in the market. And when we started with them, they were very small. And our influencer strategies, support from the digital space, the media and content were the things that we were able to do to help propel them forward. All the while, I was taking the same insights and bringing it back to Target on a multicultural committee and saying, hey, we know from my work outside of the company that this is actually what the African American woman wants when she shops the floor. And so it actually can feed each other. And I wanted to become much more successful at Target for innovation and new ideas, simply because I was operating outside. And I wasn't faulted. I know a lot of people like to hide the side hustle, and I think it depends. If you're still a rock star at work, it's hard for them to talk junk. But and then if you're bringing new ideas, things that they don't have the bandwidth necessarily to investigate, like market research information and anecdotal as well as true numbers, it changes the game completely. So as long as you keep it where there's some synergy, I think that most corporate companies are really looking for people to be entrepreneurial in that way. And I think it allowed me to move up the corporate ladder fast, but at the same time, really hone in on those entrepreneurial skills that allowed us to get, clients like Dark and Lovely and Shea Moisture, and do really cool, innovative things. We did a road trip down to Essence Festival, sponsored by Dark and Lovely. So our tribe called Curl, was 4 of us, we're all family, and we decided that we were going to take a trip down and on the way stop in some key markets for Dark and Lovely and do activations where we meet and greet and hang out with other women of color, tell them what we love about the product, and educate them. And we did that all the way down to Essence, and finally got there and took over their Instagram. This was before Instagram takeovers were commonplace. So it was sort of one of those innovative things that we got to do. And now it's sort of funny to watch that's sort of the strategy now, and people are doing it.
Can I ask you a question related to coming up with media and marketing ideas?
Sure.
There's so much space, there's so much energy in that space there's so much activity in that space. I built my following around the concept of sustainability because of my business, but I also, like you, went on a road trip and talked to lots of people and was out and actually having interactions with people and trying to get them to understand what it meant, but also what it meant for small business. So I see what that does as far as that piece. I think my question is, for a person who's like our students, who might be out there and just have like an idea in their mind, how do they take something like that and start to shift it into a media idea, a media property, a media concept that it can eventually grow into something that's part of their passion?
Well, I mean, I think that's, first of all, people are putting their entire lives now on social media, right? Like, I'm not sure I'm there yet, but I am an influencer. So I do want my followers to understand, what my journey is. And a lot of that is putting just your real self. So I think it starts with being very authentic and true to yourself. And then as soon as you come up with names or catchphrases, go and get those URLs and handles as soon as possible. So when I first started, I said I'm the weed head. And a lot of people like that's, I have shirts, I have buttons, it's like a big thing now. But when I first started, it really was, I thought it was a cool name to rebrand, because a lot of people think weed heads aren't really functional, they aren't really productive, and I'm highly functional, highly productive. So it would change a bit of the perspective. I started off with just, I want to do a blog. But then before I knew it, I realized that I was more passionate about education. And so blog soon turned into educational content. I felt in my first year, I needed to tape everything. So when you were going on your road trip, same as we did when we went on the road trip, but we also brought a camera with us. And then we put it on social media, which really drives that FOMO, and drives people wanting to ask more questions and inquire more, and even giving you ideas of what your next content play will be. So definitely buy your URLs, get yourself a digital box out, I call it. Don't just buy the one, buy the .org, the .net, the .info, whatever. And if there's a plural version of it, you want to get that as well. Cover your bases, and even if you don't plan on using YouTube or you don't plan on using Snapchat, get the name anyway, so that at least it's secured. That's the full digital box out. So that's at least you're securing your actual place that you can build.
I don't want us to get too far down that rabbit hole because we're all about cannabis today. But that came up, and I was like, God, my students are always asking me, and I'm giving this type of advice, but they hear me all the time, so they stop listening. So I wanted them to hear it from someone else, that this is how you do this thing.
Yes. Yes. No, I agree. I won't. But I will say, you want to do that, cover it. And then when you are out, turn your camera on yourself, go live every once in a while, share your thoughts authentically and freely. Believe it or not, a really common trend on Instagram right now is people literally just going live in the morning. Tammy Roman is a housewife that has Bonnet Chronicles that is now super popular, and she literally is just in her bonnet in the morning without makeup and, you know, sharing her thoughts. I think if you really feel strongly about something, someone probably also does as well, and that's where your follower base will come from. And the more authentic you are in your message, the easier it is for you to gain followers.
That's great. That's great. And let's switch gears a little bit again, because I want the students to understand a little bit about your journey. And you have a great science background, graduating from Princeton, molecular biology, right?
Yes.
Molecular biology. And I thought to myself, okay, a molecular biologist transitions to digital, built a career at a Fortune 100 company, and then transforms again into something else. But talk to me a little bit about that college experience and how you went from feeling very sciencey to going into this new creative digital space. What drew you there? And talk to maybe from the perspective of, this is how I was thinking back then a little bit, and then I went through these steps to kind of get to a place where I felt more comfortable as myself.
I got to tell you, it wasn't easy. There isn't a playbook. I went to Princeton, molecular biology out the gate, and I was sure that I was going to be a doctor. I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. And when I got there, the mobile department is what we call it for short, is super rigorous. It's one of the best in the country. And by the time you get to the junior year, you literally are science all day, every day. And prior to that, when you're in high school, you may love science, but it's one of maybe your 6 courses or 2 of. But when it's 4 of your 5, and that's the major course load, it starts to really dawn on you, is this what I want to do all the time? At the same time, I had to work while I was in college. I worked for Mac, and I loved beauty. I loved fashion. I also loved throwing events. And so I saw that there was a balance of the analytical and the creative side, and both needed to be fed. And I'll be honest, it was really hard for me to determine how to feed it. When I took my first computer science class, I learned how to build a website back when Netscape and Ethernet cords still existed. And yes. That's how old I am dating myself.
Now you're speaking the language.
Yes. And I think it was my first aha, where here you're doing something very technical and writing the code, but you want it to look beautiful and be logical as far as the navigation on the front end. And so I don't think I put it all the way together, because I'm just not that smart, to be perfectly honest. But at 21, when I took my first real computer class, I realized that the digital space, that's not what we called it then, but computer science, at least website building, allowed me to pair both sides of my brain. I could do technical, I could be very, very, very deep in a grid or deep in a code and trying to figure it out. But I also really cared about how beautiful the final product was. I transitioned into a digital marketing manager position, or what it would now be called, at the United Way. And I really credit the United Way and that experience for being able to help transition me out of science all the time. It still was technology. I worked at the Teaming for Technology. IBM was a big partner. Essentially, we created the first wireless networks in Philadelphia, and then helped the city do that for Love Park. So if you ever do Wi-Fi in Love Park, I have to be able to say I took a little bit of credit for that. But it was one of those things where I didn't get up there and, wire the city with Cisco, but I did have to go to Cisco and IBM, share with them what our overall goals were. And that was me creating the marketing strategy to bring on new sponsors. And then I also had to explain this technology to internal people that didn't get that either. And so I started to realize I was really good at taking very technical things and making it very understandable and relatable. And again, I still did not fully understand that was the best of both sides. Fast forward, I still went to medical school. Unfortunately, it was not for me. So sometimes you make that circle and you make that mistake because it's still what people tell you to do. I made the mistake for almost 3 years.
I was there, and I was like, oh my God, this is so technical. I need to switch to something that I can really dig into with my own way of thinking about culture and my own way of thinking about the world, transitioning and transforming from engineering to cross-cultural communication. No one would ever be like, how do those two pieces relate? Well, in my mind, they relate perfectly well. And without that technical background, I would not have been able to understand so much about the emerging internet and to really look at that opportunity. So I try to let my students know that too. So to pick back up where you were and to say like, okay, you're there in med school, you're doing your med school thing. What was that like to kind of go, okay, do you ever feel like I found my path, so to speak? Or are you on this journey now and have accepted the fact that your mind and your heart might tell you something else soon?
I think I was very, very unaccepting of it initially. The first year, I definitely was like, this is like junior year again at Princeton, where it's science all day long and nothing else. And they were like, Dasheeda, just get to the point where you're on the word because you're such a good person to person. And, that will be what you really enjoy. But when I got there, it was still incongruent with what I felt I was passionate about. And I just had to be, a big girl and put my big girl panties on, if you will, and kind of say, okay. It was hard though. It took a long time in the process and a lot of loan money in the process. And then eventually I left and I was on a hiatus for about a year and a half. That was my first time being an entrepreneur. I took my skills as a stylist and a makeup artist, which I happened to work to do to kind of, again, feed that creative side. And I jumped into that full time. But it was, again, almost too creative, not enough analytical. And so by a year and a half into kind of being an entrepreneur in that regard, I did build a pretty solid business. Before you know it, I was booking other artists. And next thing you know, I'm kind of managing schedules and, feel like I have an agency of some sort. And I'm like, how did I get here? How did I get here? I'll be honest. I knew I needed to go back to school. And so I said to myself, all right, I'm really loving this business aspect, this entrepreneurial aspect, but I do feel I need to know the foundations because I was winging it. I was smart enough that I could, Google a bit and search a bit, and ask some folks, but I really didn't know the basics. So I went to Rutgers and I got my MBA and I transitioned into corporate fashion, corporate beauty, specifically on the digital side. And that I thought, when I got to Target, I thought, aha, I found what I love because it really was a P&L management. I can geek out in a grid, math all the time, but I also could be on site for a shoot, a photo shoot, or a video, or a commercial. It was the best of both worlds in that way. And I was, I went on from Target to Victoria's Secret, to Fullbeauty, which is one of the largest plus size retailers in the world. And eventually I thought I could be a CEO of one of these companies. That's where I was headed. But then sometimes things happen in your life that give you an about face and an even bigger aha. And unfortunately for me, that was the passing of my mom unexpectedly. And it was catastrophic. It still is something that, it's not been just over 2 years, 2.5 years. It's something I'm still dealing with. But when I went back to corporate America after, taking a 3-week time period off, I just couldn't do it. I felt, and this is how come I know I'm a real entrepreneur, I looked at the balance, my balance sheet. How much had I driven in incremental sales for these companies? How much had I actually contributed? And when I looked at that total amount for Target, for example, $500 million in incremental sales on my strategies, and then I looked at what my tax returns looked like and what even, sort of the stocks looked like and what I owned, it was a fraction. I didn't even have 1% of it. And that is when I started to think that if I'm up next, I don't have any more parents alive, and I'm the one that's supposed to create generational wealth for my son and ensure he's okay, I need to be using my best mind on my own business. And I eventually decided that I needed to leave corporate. A lot of people thought it was just because I was grieving, but I left and I went to Arizona almost strategically. My aunt was a medical marijuana patient. She had been talking about the industry for a while. And I thought, there's something here, I just don't know. And so I went into an exploratory path. I wanted to first learn about it as a patient, as a consumer. And then before I knew it, I realized I had reached my ikigai, I've been calling it. The ikigai all year is like your life's purpose. Here it is that you're talking about a cannabis sativa, which is the scientific name for marijuana. It's also the scientific name for hemp. You are talking about confusion about the molecules, right? People talk about THC, CBD, what is that? And I'm a molecular biologist. You're also talking about confusion on the branding and the communication and the messaging. And I'm a consumer marketing expert. And most people, if you sell marijuana, you know you only can do it in your own state if you have a license. So how do you get to everybody else? Is through the digital space. And so it was one of those things where I really did find that bigger aha. And unfortunately, it was at the sacrifice of my mother, you know, in terms of losing her. But I feel like I found myself in a bigger way. This is the first role and industry that I've ever been in where I use every part of my brain all the time. I'm constantly talking about the science, constantly educating. I'm constantly doing digital and technology and how do we get past the fact that Google won't let cannabis businesses actually advertise. I'm constantly troubleshooting that. But at the same time, rebranding, doing the same thing I did in the natural hair space in the plus size market. It all fits. And it's been an amazing ride since figuring that out, to be perfectly honest.
That is such an incredible what brings my students story to. They tend to think about what's happening with their work, what's happening with their lives. They tend to think about how can I turn this into something that's important to me. In these last few minutes, if you had just a couple of bits of advice about taking those little nuggets, those little sparks in people's hearts and kind of turning them into a business and turning them into something, what would be a little bit of advice that you would give them, Dasheeda? And then I want to thank you again for spending the time with me here and giving these kinds of nuggets of information out to our students. And I'd love to invite you to come by our campus sometime and see some of our students and come to some of our bigger events. I think you're an amazing advocate for a brand new industry that's emerging.
Thank you. I appreciate being here. And, you know, honestly, I really do want to educate people who are at the college level, who are emerging, because the pipeline for the industry, it requires it, right? We need people to start thinking about it. As far as being an entrepreneur, though, I would say, you know, definitely try to be honest with yourself and authentic about what you actually are passionate about. Even though I was a science girl and I was labeled as such, it took me till about 20 to say, no, I am both a science girl and I'm a makeup girl. I'm a fashion girl too, and it's okay. And then I started to look for places that I could blend it. So, you know, look for, is it the Gantt chart that it goes over each other? I can't remember, but there's one of the charts where all of the circles kind of overlap, and you're looking for that point in the middle that everything kind of overlaps. Sometimes you'll just get, like I did, the first two, or the other two. But if you keep playing with it, almost like a Rubik's Cube, you will get to the point where there are all three converging, and you'll just have to figure out what that balance is. But I do think it starts with being authentic to who you are, and ensuring that you're not compromising that as you're going on the journey.
Very good. This is Dasheeda Dawson. She is the Weed Head, the global cannabis advocate, and she's also a digital expert with award-winning content out there. She has created content for some of the biggest companies in the world, and now she's advocating for this brand new industry that's emerging, and it's a fantastic opportunity. So I look forward to other people commenting on this video, getting out there, sharing your perspectives on what's happening for you. Get in touch with Dasheeda. She has her contact information, her website, and all that will be on this post as well. Thank you again for being here today. It has been a lovely experience.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, bye everyone.
Bye.